If there is some part of you that sort of hope to still send your children to school and be convinced against home education, don't read these books. I mean, when I flipped over and I read this headline, atrocious advice from Super Nanny, I was like, tell me more. Yay, finally a book that isn't by a middle-aged white man. And I said, by the end of the book, I feel 1000% reaffirmed on decision to home educate and how bonkers the school system is. So you are thinking about whether to send your children to school, take them out of school, or you've been home educating for a long time. I'm hoping that some of these books you may find really useful, inspirational, and reassuring. I've been really excited to film this video for a long time. I've finally got my pile of books together. I've broken this video down into 3 sections, and I've also added one book in at the end, which I literally just finished this morning. I wasn't going to include it in this video, but it was so good. I've just tucked it in at the end. It has no section, it's a section of its own. If you're here for the first time and you like content about home education, theory, practice, what we do on a day-to-day basis, please consider hitting the subscribe button. Okay, so I just watched that little bit back just to check it came out okay, only to notice my cat was trying to escape the whole time. Rest assured, he's fine. He's found his place by the books. I found it hard to name these sections. I'm not entirely sure why I did to myself, but these ones I've categorised into a sort of overview section. Maybe you're just newish to home education, wondering if you should even do it, and you want kind of more of an overview. Book number 1, The Call of the Wild and Free by Ainsley Arment. Now, I don't know too much about the whole wild and free movement, but I've had this book for a while now. It's probably one of the books I first read that was specifically about home education, and I like a few things about this book. Firstly, from a purely aesthetic point of view, I love the layout. I did get it in hardback. I don't know what the paperback's like, but it's got just some really lovely sort of illustrations and photos. Everything there was just text, hang on. Some lovely photography in there. It was just, you know, really enjoyable to read from that respect. But there are a couple of chapters I really love in this book. So the first one is the chapter about the myths and kind of the objections people give you to homeschooling, and answers that you can kind of come back with about why those myths aren't actually true. So like the socialization myth, which we've all heard so many times about home ed children not socializing, and the qualification myth, you know, am I qualified? I'm not qualified to teach my children, I'm not a teacher. All those sort of ones we've either been told by other people or said to ourselves. And then I really like the influences to homeschool chapter. I say homeschool because this is a US-based book, but really applicable, I think, wherever you are in the world. So the influences of homeschooling chapter, she breaks down several different ones, like classical, Montessori, I think she has Charlotte Mason in here, and it really just gives like a really basic overview into each one. But I think it's great for just sort of getting a feel for the different sort of styles that you might use. And she has a slight part on unschooling as well, and yeah, just great, I think, for getting a feel of what might suit you if you're in the beginning stages of home education. Okay, next up, one that has become kind of super famous in home educating circles recently, Changing Our Minds by Naomi Fisher, and she's just released another book about I think neurodivergence and self-directed education, which I really want to read next. If you want to get a bit of a taste for her writing, she does some really great sort of mini articles on her Facebook page, so I'd really recommend going and have a read of some of those. She's a clinical psychologist by trade, you know, with all the PhDs and doctorates and all that, so you get real research-backed, fact-based evidence here about how children learn and the kind of environments that are best for children to learn in, which was really interesting. I love one of the lines, like almost straight away into the book, education starts with empowerment rather than compliance. And, you know, she rightfully notes that school children for the most part are powerless, and that school was never an evidence-based intervention. It's not like people did years of research into how children best learn and then came up with the concept of school. The way we execute the school system isn't based on large data studies. I love the chapter she has on self-directed learning, which kind of addresses some of the fears people have of like, how will children learn if they don't go to school? And what if they don't learn to read? you know, when they're 5 years old or 4.5 years old. And then there was a really great chapter on self-directed learning kind of in action in everyday life. So I don't know if you can see this here, but she lists out here all of the learning that takes place in an everyday action, such as baking a cake, so cooking, maths, reading, logic, science, socialization. And I think if you are a home educator who kind of does follow a bit of a unschooling type approach, that sort of thinking is great for you to be able to just go about living your life doing the things that your kids are interested in, and being able to sort of like dissect out the learning that's taking place in something like that. They're not just wasting their days away baking cakes, they're learning this, that and the other, and kind of adapting your mind to be able to see where those learning opportunities are taking place. So yeah, really recommend that, and once I read her other one I will let you know what that's like as well. So lastly, in this sort of overview beginners section, I shouldn't call it beginners section, too late now, we have Teach Your Own by John Holt. John Holt, probably one of the best known names in homeschooling, home education circles. I think he actually coined the term unschooling, so yeah, a heavy hitter in that regard. This is actually the most updated version of his book Teach Your Own, the indispensable guide to living and learning with children at home. So yeah, very specific to home education. Now, I'll be honest, I don't actually find John Holt the easiest to read. Like, I've got quite a few of his older books, not up here. Yeah, they're not like a breeze to read. I don't know why, maybe it's just me. I do kind of like have to push myself to get through them a little bit. But nonetheless, the ideas contained within them are really indispensable. Like, so much of what he says just makes sense, yet goes against everything that we've been sort of like brought up to believe is normal about education and life in general. Really importantly, I think, this chapter, Learning Without Teaching, and he says, to parents I say, above all else, don't let your home become some terrible miniature copy of the school. No lesson plans, no quizzes, no tests, no report cards. Even leaving your children alone would be better. At least they could figure out some things on their own. So yeah, there are a lot of John Holt books out there. I really like this one, Teach Your Own, revised kind of for the modern times we're living in. Okay, we've had a warm up, our brain juices are flowing. Now I'm moving on to the section that I'm calling the hard hitting, the ones that don't hold any punches. And here they are. I'm going to introduce the first two in one almost, because they're both from the same author. Another really big name kind of in home education circles, John Taylor Gatto. Honestly, if there is some part of you that sort of hope to still send your children to school and be convinced against home education, don't read these books. Because they sort of say a lot of things that you already know deep down, some things that you don't know, but he says it in a way that you can't refute it, you can't find any defence against what he says, like really holds no punches. John Taylor Gatto was an American school teacher. I believe he won like a lot of awards for his teaching, but he was also super critical of the education system. Okay, so first up is Dumbing Us Down, the Hidden Curriculum of Compulsory Schooling, and that was the first John Taylor Gatto book I wrote. First John Taylor Gatto book I read, and I just love it. Like, I would not do it justice in this little summary, but I have to highlight one particular essay in here. They're all essays or speeches he gave in various places. This one was We Need Less School, Not More, because I think in light of the pandemic, many parents were led to believe that in order to catch up on everything their child had missed through missing school because of the pandemic, the answer was more school, more work over the summer holidays, longer school days, etc. Like, we all saw the news articles about that. And I think this essay in particular is pretty compelling as to why kids already spend too much time in school, let alone giving them more school, and that the time that they spend in school is quite often at the expense of becoming a complete human being. I have to go for this part to just give you a feel of how he really doesn't hold back. Children learn what they live. Put kids in a class and they will live out their lives in an invisible cage, isolated from their chance at community. Interrupt kids with bells and horns all the time and they will learn that nothing is important. Force them to plead for the natural right to the toilet and they will become liars and toadies. Don't know what that means. Ridicule them and they will retreat from human association. Shame them and they will find 100 ways to get even. The habits taught in large-scale organisations are deadly. Like, that sounds pretty savage, doesn't it? But where's the lie? Like, all those things happen in school. And sometimes I think when we're trying to make a decision like that, we need someone to just tell us straight, like tell us how it is, hit us with the reality that we're trying to avoid seeing, and just pull the veil from over our eyes. And I think that's what John Taylor Gatto does. Moving on to the second book that I've read of his, Weapons of Mass Instruction, a school teacher's journey through the dark world of compulsory schooling. He goes into how the real purpose of school is to make the population manageable, good workers and consumers. Like, even in the prologue, he just goes straight in. Do we really need school? I don't mean education, just forced schooling. 6 classes a day, 5 days a week, 9 months a year for 12 years. Is this deadly routine really necessary? And if so, for what? Don't hide behind reading, writing and arithmetic as rationale, because 2 million happy homeschoolers have surely put that banal justification to rest. I really love it. But one thing he really breaks down is how school's primary purpose as an institution is to create within us self-alienation. And there's a book that I'm going to discuss in the last section which really highlights how the purpose of education should really be about self-discovery and self-knowledge, kind of the opposite of what he highlights that schools do at the moment. Again, these two are real hard hitters. They are going to present you with a lot of arguments that you won't be able to ignore. And if you're in two minds about whether to home educate or not, these could be the deciding factor for you. Okay, the last one in this section, and then we move on to what is probably my favourite section. We have Alfie Kohn, and this is Feel Bad Education and Other Contrarian Essays on Children and Schooling. Now, I've watched a lot of Alfie Kohn videos on YouTube, and I do a lot of head nodding in agreement. This is the first book I've read of his, but I am really keen to read more now. Punished by Rewards is probably one that you might have heard of. I think that's one of his most well-known ones. This one is about education in general rather than home education, but another one that will just utterly convince you of the reasons not to send your children to school and reassure you that you are making the right decision. It starts with a really great chapter on progressive education, so things like attending to the whole child, community, collaboration, social justice, intrinsic motivation, deep understanding, active learning, all those things that we don't have in schools, and also why progressive education is so hard to come by. There are some great chapters around standardization and the damage of test scores, or should I say chasing test scores and making your whole curriculum about the attainment of test scores, structured timetables, etc. And a really great chapter, the final chapter, Beyond the School's Psychological Issues and Parenting. I mean, when I flipped over and I read this headline, Atrocious Advice from Super Nanny, I was like, tell me more. We all know she's atrocious. And this chapter all feeds into how we learn, how we're motivated to learn, what kills our motivation to learn. I mean, you have to look at my notes I made on this page. I don't know if you can see. I just put yes, 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 this. Yeah, I loved that one. Hard hitting again, holds no punches, tells it like it is, and gives you little to dispute, really. Okay, moving on to the final section, my favourite section. The cat has well and truly zoned out there. Hope you're not all as bored as he is by this. So I've termed this section the spiritual. That's going to mean different things to different people, that term. I often think it's utterly abused, but anyway, what I think I mean by the title of this section is just elevating beyond and finding the whole human and our connection to life on a greater level, and how school systems are so detrimental to achieving this. So I've kind of got 4 books in this section, but 3 are by the same person. So I'm going to start off with this amazing book, Raising Free People, Unschooling as Liberation and Healing Work by Akilah Richards. Yay, finally a book that isn't by a middle-aged white man. As this title says, this is kind of focused on unschooling, so if that is not your world, it really asks you to open up your mind beyond everything that you think to know to be true about how children learn, everything that you've been brought up to believe about education. There is a lot about consent-based education and how schooling is the complete opposite of that. Akilah takes us through her own personal journey, both from her childhood and upbringing, and then the transition with her own children from school into unschooling, how she had to sort of like ask so many questions of herself and let go of so many expectations and beliefs. I mean, there's so much depth in this book. It's really hard to do it justice in a little summary here, so please read it. It's not huge, but it will bring you so much value and joy and inspiration. I really love her personal explanation of unschooling, which is probably something that I really feel like I'm still in the process of aspiring to rather than having achieved, and everything she says about childism. I'll read this to you. Our family defines unschooling as child-trusting, anti-oppression, liberatory, love-centred approach to parenting and caregiving. As unschoolers, the four of us operate with a core belief that children own themselves and that parents and other adults work with their children to nurture their confident autonomy, not their ability to obey adults' directives. And when education is forced and standardised, which it is, that was my comment, it stifles natural learning and the things to which learning inevitably leads. It kills creativity, chokes out confident autonomy. It is an act of colonisation. Like, so important. Click off this video and go and order it, please. Okay, and then onto this mini stack here. These are all books by Jiddu Krishnamurti. Now, these books to me were most instrumental in helping me make a decision around whether to send my children to school when they reach school age. So I probably started reading this when they were around 3, I would say. My first ever video on this channel was about Krishnamurti and his beliefs around education and how they influenced me. Honestly, these books are actually like precious to me because they came to me in a time when I was like in turmoil over the decision about schooling, and yeah, I hope I will pass them down to my children one day if they ever need to understand why I made the decisions I did. They were like a strong hug that gave me the confidence to forge forward in the decisions I was making on a path that often isn't seen as normal, even by the people closest to you. A decision that you make against people who think you are going to damage your children by not sending them to school. You need this sort of strength to stand fast against that. Like, I could do a whole video series on JK and his influence on education, which I might, and funnily enough, it was on Akilah Richards' podcast that I ever heard anyone else talk about Krishnamurti, when it was either herself or one of her guests mentioned about his school in the States, and there's one in the UK too. So that was like very, yeah, reaffirming to me. I have so many notes in the back of these books. Every time I read, blank page, every time I read something, there you go. Every time I read something that resonated with me or was about education, I made a note. But ultimately, if I can summarise in any way his sort of philosophy, I would say it was that education primarily is about understanding yourself, and schools move you away from the ability to do that more than we could ever conceive. They teach you to detach from yourself, if anything, like we were talking about in the John Taylor Gatto books. These books are deeply spiritual but also practical to our everyday lives. There's so much I could read you from these books, but I will whet your appetite with one. This is from Education and the Significance of Life. The function of education is to create human beings who are integrated and therefore intelligent. We may take degrees and be mechanically efficient without being intelligent. Intelligence is not mere information. It is not derived from books, nor does it consist of clever, self-defensive responses and aggressive assertions. One who has not studied may be more intelligent than the learned. We have made examinations and degrees the criterion of intelligence and have developed cunning minds that avoid vital human issues. I would probably start with this one, Education and the Significance of Life. It was the one I started with, and it was really just groundbreaking for me. Like, yeah, I can't put it in words. Then we've got Insights into Education, Bringing About a Totally New Mind. And also love this one, The Whole Movement of Life is Learning. Kind of says it all really, doesn't it? Letters to His Schools. So that was section number 3. Oh, my bonus book. Where did I put it? Sorry, Ben. My bonus book that I literally just finished this morning and wasn't going to include, but it was just So good. And I've not really gotten into these sort of series of books before, so I was quite surprised by it. And that is one of the very short introduction books, Education, a very short introduction by Gary Thomas. I can't even remember where I got this book from, but I just finally picked it up and it was so good. So it sort of starts off, well, it's all throughout, but it kind of starts off with a history of education all the way back to people like Plato. And I absolutely love that. Even Plato said, let me find this, a free soul ought not to pursue any study slavishly. For while bodily labours performed under constraint do not harm the body, nothing that is learned under compulsion stays with the mind. Do not then, my friend, keep children to their studies by compulsion, but by play. That was, Plato said that in the Republic, like, how true is that even today? And so then it goes on to talk about kind of different education traditions. So again, like progressive education versus formal education. Loads of research-backed information and how so much of what we've come to just take as like accepted norms, actually there's no evidence to support it at all. He talks about John Holt's work in here, so that could be a good little introduction to his theories if you've not come across them before. And in the last chapter he discusses Ivan Illich, his De-Schooling Society book, which I'm now I had heard of it before, but I'm now really keen to read it myself, and his like advocacy for getting rid of schools completely, really. And what I liked about this book is that it's really given me like new avenues to go off and look at, different new books to read. It's led me to have a lot more questions, which I think is the sign of a really good book. So yeah, if you want to know more about kind of the whole theory of education, which I think is really important as home educators, I'm sure I've harped on about it before, but I think as home educators, when we make the decision not to send our children to school, we've usually put more thought into it and more research into it than people ever do who just send their kids to school because that's what you do. So yeah, if you're into that sort of thing, this was just such a great overview of education, and I finished it feeling like I text my home ed mums. We have like a small group of some of us, and I said, by the end of the book, I feel 1000% reaffirmed on decision to home educate and how bonkers the school system is. So maybe they'll go off and read that as well. So yeah, these are all some really great books. You'll notice there's a few on top here that I didn't actually talk about, so that could be like video number 2. Really great books for various stages. I think there's something to suit everyone, no matter what stage of home education you're at, even if you've not even started yet, or even if you've been doing it for years. If you've got any books that have really influenced you that I haven't mentioned, please leave them below, because I've got tons more that I still want to read. Like, I love books. Any which way you want to digest this sort of content, these are just ones that have really been meaningful to me, and I hope I've given you some inspiration. I'll see you on the next video.